Anyway, welcome everybody. This is the IPA Journal Club with Danielle Knafo, PhD, as our guest author. Next slide. I'm Jack Drescher, and I am the moderator of this of the Journal Club. My bio you've probably read. Dr. Knafo's bio. Next slide. She is a psychologist, psychoanalyst, professor, supervisor, author, and writing coach. She has many achievements. She's written many books. I happen to have a copy of her latest book about working psychoanalytic treatment of psychosis, which is the subject of today's talk. The next slide, please. So just some information about how the Journal Club works for people who have not been here before. Our goal is to be interactive so that you, the readers of Dr. Knafo's paper, can speak directly with her. As I mentioned, we are recording this session, and it will be posted both on the IPA's website and the IPA's YouTube channel, usually within a week. That would be, of course, the work of our tech person, Marcos Speranza of Argentina. Thank you, Marcos. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can leave your camera off. But if you do not wish to be recorded, I may not call on you to ask the author a question. Next slide. If you do have a question or comment, don't put it in the chat. Use the Q&A section, because we don't use the chat function for this meeting. And we ask you to stay muted unless you're called on to ask a question in the Q&A section. And I will pick questions from the Q&A section. When I call on you, please unmute yourself, turn on your camera if it's not already turned on. And when you're called on and unmuted, identify yourself, let us know where you're from, your name and where you're from. And also, please speak slowly and clearly, because not everybody attending the Journal Club is a native English speaker. And if you've not downloaded the paper yet, the link to do so is now being posted in the chat. And so if you haven't read the paper, hopefully you have read the paper. It's a very interesting paper. Okay, so why don't we get started? Welcome again. Right now I can see everybody's face on the screen. Welcome everybody. It's very nice to see you all. Danielle, good morning.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Hello,
So I have a couple of questions to start with, so the audience can think about their own questions based on their own reactions to the paper. So my first question is, how did you first become interested in working with psychotic patients? Because this is often a highly stigmatized group that many clinicians in our field either don't want to treat or don't know how to treat.
Yes, I agree. I was interested in it from the start of my career, partly because I was always interested in extreme states. And my early research and writing focused on creativity. And I always saw similarities between the creativity of psychosis in terms of the symptoms and what they mean, and creating alternate worlds, and also the creativity that was required of the therapist or the analyst to understand, to reach those who are considered unreachable. And so because I'm a creative person, I'm interested in creativity. I think that was my first in to working with psychosis and being interested in psychotic states and extreme states. It allowed for more creativity in the work, I felt. And I also, because they're a stigmatized population, because not a lot of people are drawn to the work, I felt my own need to be challenged and try to see what I could do with this population that wasn't particularly treated or considered treatable. However, I'm not young. And so when I was training, psychoanalysts were the attendings on inpatient units. And so I learned from psychoanalysts how to work with psychosis. It was very popular at the time. That has changed. Unfortunately, psychoanalysis has handed over the treatment of psychosis to psychiatry and psychopharmacology. And that means that they're mostly treated with medication and not so much with therapy.
Yeah. Is just to build on that question, was there a first patient or an early patient who comes to mind, keeping confidentiality in mind, when we talk about patients in this format, but was there some very compelling case that really drew you into this kind of work?
What I remember, the very first, my first training was in Israel, and I was volunteering at an inpatient unit in one of the most well-known psychiatric institutions. And the very first day, they threw me into the work. I had to hold somebody down who was getting electric shock treatment. I had to, observe them washing patients, female patients, with hoses. And so the beginning was kind of a shock in institutional treatment, if one could call that treatment. And so that was that first impression of there has to be a better way than this. Yeah.
Yeah. That form of treatment sounds like it's even before my time, and you're not older than me, so I don't. Yes, I see. Because I was an inpatient attending, and we didn't have to hold the patients down for ECT because they were anesthetized in our part of the world.
No, we held them down.
I see. So here's a question that came to me from reading the paper itself. You provide examples of how auditory hallucinations can have both purpose and meaning. And you cite a study of patients in which many of the patients prefer to keep hearing their voices. And you also mentioned a group I've read about called the Hearing Voices Network. So I wondered if you had any direct experience with that group, its members, and that philosophy.
Yes, it's a more recent group. It's a peer-run group, Hearing Voices Network, that of people who hear voices. I don't know if people know, but 10% of the population hears voices. Not everyone is psychotic. But this group is a kind of anti-medical model group. They've been through, a lot of them have been through medical model, and they've decided that rather than use medication, take medication to rid themselves of their voices, they prefer to work with each other and learn how to live with the voices. And they help each other. It's a community kind of group, like 12-step programs, where people help each other and are on the same thing. And apparently there's a lot of success, and people feel very good about being in these groups. Yeah. I think they began in England, but they're all over. We have them. They're all over the world now.
Okay. So here's another thing about the paper that struck me. This is a quote from page 2 that you write: psychosis is a communication from the depth of one's radical aloneness, unconsciously fashioned to hold all the clues to recovery. And although I appreciate the optimism expressed by your statement, it caught my attention immediately that the clues to recovery lie in the psychotic message. And because, I'm someone who believes in co-constructed narratives, I did find the idea appealing that you, the therapist, can introduce an alternative perspective on the patient's psychotic symptoms. But I couldn't help wondering if that analytic attitude or belief might not, in some cases, prevent an overly optimistic therapist from acknowledging that perhaps psychotherapy was not the solution to the patient's difficulties.
Mm,
That's one of my provocative questions. Sorry.
they're provocative. Well, I follow Frieda from Reichmann,
Uh-huh.
who believed that no person with psychosis was hopeless. And so I always, and that's with any patient, not just the more extreme, but certainly the more extreme. Um, I don't know. I do have an optimistic approach. Now that doesn't, it doesn't mean that miracles will happen. It takes work. It takes collaboration. It takes establishing a therapeutic alliance. I think for those of you who read the paper, my the longer case at the end of the paper of Hisoka, that was a 16-year case. And it took a long time for this patient to feel safe and open up. And, there were many phases of treatment, but he got better. He's on his own now completely. We're still in touch. So I think a lot of it takes that optimistic. It's not just optimistic, it's that in my experience, 40 years of experience working with psychosis, I have seen the meaning-making function of symptoms. And I think it started with Freud. Freud believed that psychotic symptoms carried meaning when he studied Schreber, the case of Schreber. He saw a lot of meaning in his symptoms and in Schreber's symptoms, and analyzed them and came up with, the megalomania, the retreat, the attempt. He was the first, I think, to see an attempt at connection in the symptoms themselves. And that's one of the theses of my paper, is that psychosis in itself is a lonely condition that can create an alienation, but that the alienation of psychosis also can create loneliness. It's like this negative feedback loop, and people create symptoms partly as ways, albeit they might be, you can consider them flawed ways, but if you're going for meaning, ways of finding connections, and connection not just to people, to reality, because the psychotic state removes people from their homes, their families, a lot from themselves. A lot of people who are medicated, over-medicated, feel that they've lost themselves, that they don't feel that they are who they were. And so there's this loneliness from the self, from the reality, not just, and from connection with others.
So if I might translate in my own head what I think I hear you saying, I'm psychotic. I have a very idiosyncratic, personalized system of understanding the world, which nobody else understands. But if I meet a therapist, an optimistic therapist who doesn't give up on people, there's the possibility that we might be able to communicate, because you're going to make the effort to try and understand my very personal meaning-making system.
Partly that sees the therapist as very active.
Mm-hmm.
And I try with people, I try not to call them psychotic person, because psychosis, I think, can be an episode, it can be a state. And when we say a person is psychotic, it's like the whole person. And I believe that we all have psychotic core, we all have non-psychotic parts of our personality. So when I talk about psychosis, I talk about a state. And some of that, what you described as activity, we can convey that without necessarily bringing it to the fore too actively, at least in the beginning, because that can scare a lot of people with psychosis. one of my students, former students, who was very good with working with extreme states, loved working in inpatient, but he became a little arrogant, and he would come, interpret a little too quickly, too easily. And one patient punched him in the nose and broke his nose. So you have to tread gently and slowly, and not assume that you know the meaning. I think the meaning making is done collaboratively.
Mhm.
It's not
Of
like
course.
you listen to the patient, oh, I got it, I figured you out. Sometimes you have no idea, and you just start getting little clues. Edward Podval, who was a Buddhist psychoanalyst who worked at Chestnut Lodge, and also Austin Riggs, talked about islands of sanity, islands of clarity, that you look for these little islands that allow an inroad into the mind of the person experiencing psychosis, and allows a bridge between the therapist and the patient to build upon.
I actually, when I meant, I didn't think that interpreting is the only activity. Listening is an activity. So that's an activity that, that the patient analyst must engage in, if I'm going to try and understand. I guess the issues really have a lot to do with the kind of countertransferences that would evoke in therapists who have to be very patient and listen for a long time before they can grasp the meaning of what it is they're listening to.
Yeah, but I think even in the beginning, sometimes you get clues. But somebody asked me recently, well, what about a patient who speaks in word salad? What do you do with that? How do you understand? How do you make meaning? And you probably can't make a lot of meaning, but one thing you start listening to is, oh, one word keeps getting repeated in the word salad. So you start thinking, well, that's a significant word. Among this jumble of words, there you get an opening. There are little openings that you can train yourself to start identifying, and those can become inroads into
Mhm.
understanding the patient, or not even understanding, opening up a dialogue. Listening is very important, but sometimes with people with negative symptoms, a lot of times we speak mostly of people with hallucinations and delusions, positive symptoms. People with negative symptoms, there's not a lot to listen to for a long time. They can be in retreat. They cannot, speak a lot. And so a lot of it is the patience of sitting there, of feeling what the patient is feeling, and letting them know that you're there, and allowing them that development of a sense of safety and trust. One of the things I write in the paper is that there's this dual motivation. One is for connection, but the other one is for safety. And a lot of people who are experiencing psychosis feel unsafe. They feel that they're in danger. And so you have to respect that. And creating a safe environment is number one priority before you start delving into meaning making.
I'm taking up a lot of the time. Nobody in the audience has asked a question or has a comment. We really encourage interaction in this setting. Anybody have anything that they'd like to ask Dr. Knafo while we have her here? Anybody have any reactions to the paper as they read it that oh, I see a Q&A. There we go.
To the paper cases that I mentioned, any cases you might have.
Well, we have Leslie Pavincic, excuse my pronunciation. Leslie, could you turn on your camera and unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm interested in knowing more.
Leslie, tell us where you're from.
Oh, sorry, I'm from London.
Hi.
Hi. And I'm interested in knowing more about how you might manage the setting with patients, particularly if they're acutely psychotic and there's an issue of risk, either to themselves or others. My understanding when I've been thinking about maybe taking someone on who has had a serious psychotic breakdown, it seems important to have some kind of psychiatric backup if needed. And actually, it's very difficult in the UK, in London anyway. I have found it extremely difficult to get that. And actually, I've had cases where psychiatrists have actively discouraged the patient from seeking psychoanalytic therapy.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how, how you've managed it. And the other, sorry, related to that, you mentioned that psychoanalysis is much less involved now with psychotic, psychiatry seems to have, and wondered, what are your thoughts about why that is? Because it seems to me that within psychiatry, a lot of patients get sort of, become so sort of institutionalized in terms of having a psychiatric career. And, it feels pretty hopeless.
Okay, those are two good questions.
Okay.
I'll take the first one first, the danger, the risk. Of course, you have to consider risk and danger, especially if you're taking on someone in private practice. But even, if you're referring someone in the United States, I don't know how it is in the rest of these countries that many of you are from, but it's things have changed. And today, most people are hospitalized, are taken into the hospital only if they pose a risk to themselves or to someone else. If they have hallucinations, if they have all kinds of, that's not sufficient to be hospitalized. And this is at the dismay of their families often, where they feel that the person needs help, but the hospitals won't take them in unless they're a real danger. So that's the hospital. In private practice, I think you do have to assess that. But you also have to know that people who experience psychosis are not really more dangerous than other patients. It's kind of a myth that people with psychosis are dangerous. And if anything, they're more dangerous to themselves, it's been found, than to others. And that has to be assessed and evaluated. I work with, when someone is in an acute state, I see them more frequently because I feel that they need that safe space. Sometimes I see them every day. Christopher Bolas cancels all his patients and only sees the patient undergoing a psychotic break for 8-12 hours until they get to some meaning making. So I create that. Of course, I'm assessing whether they do need hospitalization, whether they do need some medication. I always work with medication backup. I'm a psychologist. I don't prescribe medications. Sometimes they come to me medicated because they've been hospitalized. And usually they're overly medicated and they're told that they have to be medicated for the rest of their lives. And that they have a disease like diabetes, that just, they have to accept this. And I've had many young people, first psychotic break, who are institutionalized, put on heavy duty medication and told this. They're kicked out of school and then they come to me. And I have to disabuse them of some of the things that they've been told and give them hope, the optimist. But not just an optimist. I've seen that this can be turned around, especially if you can get in there quickly enough. So there's a chapter in my book on inpatient versus outpatient treatment and what one needs to do to assess on an outpatient basis if you're taking somebody on in order to work comfortably. You have to be comfortable. Harold Searles, who worked with psychosis primarily, said that the therapist has to sit in the most comfortable chair. And I believe that. If we are not comfortable, we can't convey that sense of safety and comfort. And if we're not comfortable, if we're worried about what happens to the patient in between sessions, then we have to, then maybe that's not for outpatient work, or something else has to be brought in. I talk to family members, I talk to partners, I try to get them into groups as well, so that the burden is not all on me, especially if somebody is having an acute break. So that's your first question. The second question, why has psychoanalysis receded in the background in terms of treatment of psychosis? Well, several reasons. One, there was the drug revolution. This is the main reason. The theories that came about that psychosis is different from other mental illnesses in that it is more biological, it's a chemical imbalance, all of these, you know, neurophysiological theories about the difference of psychosis from everything else. And therefore, we had to, the responsible thing was for psychiatry or psychopharmacology, people who dealt with medication were the ones who should be responsible for this kind of treatment. And many medical schools didn't require that psychiatrists, residents even learn therapy, forget psychoanalysis, therapy. So, but psychoanalysts went along with it, not everywhere. In America, for sure. I think in France, the Lacanians always continued to work with psychosis. In the UK, I think the Kleinians didn't shy away from working with psychosis because they work with these primitive, you know, defenses. So it depends where, but in America, for sure, we handed it back. And that's one of the reasons why Michael and I wrote this book, was to bring back, you know, the training and the guidance so that people aren't so reticent to take on psychotic patients.
And I did just put in the chat the title of your book, which is from Rutledge, from breakdown to breakthrough: psychoanalytic treatments of psychosis. We have a couple more people who have in the Q&A. Emily Billman, could you unmute yourself and turn on your camera? Emily?
Emily.
No?
Do you see?
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Emily. Where are you?
I'm in Geneva, in Switzerland.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you. And I found this paper very interesting. And one of my questions, since you say in the beginning that you were interested by Metzos's, the way.
Yeah.
So I was wondering about the functions that he referred to, which for me, you know, come out in this very successful analysis that you had with the Japanese, with the adopted boy.
Yes.
So could you please speak about the functions? Actually, they do come out, but I would like to have, you know, your idea of these functions. And do you see the functions already steeped or inherent, what should I say, in the symptoms? So that's one question. And then the other question that I have, the avatar therapy. I was very interested by the avatar therapy and how, and do you have experience with the avatar therapy, and how can this avatar therapy bring, shortcuts two, I don't want to say psychosis because, yeah, I'm convinced that it is changing. It is a changing concept. It's a changing, it's a changing diagnostic. So for me, it's better to say psychic crisis.
Mhm.
Psychosis, huh? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Let me answer, thank you for your questions. Let me answer your second question first, because it's a shorter answer. The avatar therapy, I haven't engaged in that at all, but I have read a lot about it, and it seems the research coming out is quite positive. What they do is a person who has hallucinations describes the hallucinations to another person, to the avatar therapist, and they actually create an avatar of the hallucinated personage, and they have the patient, let's say, interact with their own avatar on the screen. And so they get to know the avatar, but also they can start having more control over the avatar. Now it's, it's actually a being, a virtual being, but it's a being that now they get to know and they can interact with and start not having to feel so out of control with this hallucinated being. So people tend to develop a certain confidence in their ability to handle their hallucinations with this. It's a new form of treatment. Certainly it has to be developed further, but it has possibilities as, AI and technology are entering our field more and more. Your other question was about my patient, Hisoka, and whether, I'm going to repeat it. Tell me if this is what you were asking. Whether I saw early on in his symptoms, his desire both for connection, but also for pushing away the connection. This was a patient, and I gave a longer description in the book. I give an even longer description of this case, but in the paper, I just wanted to show how this took time, but I saw little cracks. It's like those islands of sanity from the beginning. So in the beginning, even though we went months almost without speaking, I would ask him a question. He would answer me with one word, right? Tell me about your relationship to your parents. Detached. And that was it. So there's so many questions you can ask to keep this going. So a lot of that early time was to sit with him in silence. But one of the things I saw, unlike a lot of patients who look away or look inward, he never lost the gaze. His gaze was always hooked into mine. He sought the connection through his eyes, nothing else. The body remained completely impassive, verbalizations minimal, but that gaze gave me a clue. This guy wants connection. And so that gave me the assurance to keep going. So it's those kinds of things that you hold on to and you build on with patients. And almost every patient has something like that just shows, okay, I'm pushing you away, or I'm making things so difficult or so difficult to understand. And yet there are little ways that they show, come in, don't go away, stay with me, try to understand me.
Thank you very much. Actually, my question was much simpler. I saw the functions, that you referred to as your hypothesis in Menzel's. The fact that the therapy was successful. He got closer to his parents. He moved home. He found a job. he took a dog, you know, and that was, yeah, and brought you the dog, you know, the function, yeah, you know, this is the thing. Yeah, thank
Yes, yeah, and it was.
Hi,
Yeah.
hi. We have a bunch of questions waiting in the waiting room. If
Okay, thank you.
Emily, you're okay with this response so far?
almost certainly.
Thank you. Okay. So Susan Mindel has a couple of comments. Could you unmute yourself and turn on your camera and introduce yourself, where you're from?
My camera's on. I'm Susan Mindel. I'm from Montreal, and I really just had comments because I've run into these ideas, and one that really struck me years ago, which really kind of opened me up to the idea of working with people who were psychotic in a psychoanalytic way, were some psychoanalysts who were from Quebec City that ran a clinic
Yes.
there, and they worked very long term with
Yeah.
patients, and they worked with their dreams.
Yes.
And they got the patients to attach to their dreams. And at first the dreams were aligned with the psychosis, but over time the dreams became more and more directive towards. But as you pointed out, it was they were 7-10 year analyses, with these people.
And with Hisoka, as I pointed out, we didn't speak almost for months. And then one day I became exasperated by it. And I said, do you dream? And he said, oh, yes, I dream every night and I remember my dreams. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, psychoanalysts dream. And we began, but then he said, I don't believe that they have any meaning. I said, okay, humor me, tell me your dream. And little by little, the dreams became part of the work that we did. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just that little bit further away, I think, like the sense, like I'm not really responsible for my dreams. Anyway, I'm enjoying this. I enjoyed your paper. It's very encouraging.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another Susan Light. You had a comment. Did you want to say it out loud? Show your face and tell us where you're from.
Oh, yeah, it's just New York. Hi. It was just very quickly, it was in reference to the earlier question about why medicine and psychiatry is used more readily than analytic approaches. It's also got a lot to do in this country with what the insurance companies will help patients out with. They're much more inclined, whether it's psychosis or not, but certainly with psychotic patients, much less favorably inclined to help people out with a long protracted treatment when you can, you can squash symptoms in, no time at all. That's all I wanted to say.
That's true, but I want to add that about 50% of people with who are put on antipsychotics stop taking their medicine. 50%. And we have to think about why that is. And I think it's not just because of the side effects. They gain 50 pounds, they gain a lot of weight. And they have some serious side effects in terms of it shortens one's lifespan. It can increase,
Right.
dementia, but also it takes away their meaning.
Absolutely.
If their meaning is, as I'm arguing, is part of the symptom formation, when you take that away, they're left without a life without meaning. And so they prefer to go off the medication to have their meaning, their life feel meaningful to them.
I agree with you. I'm just saying the insurance companies are not so friendly to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So we have 3 more people so far. Ederna Chopeli, forgive my pronunciation. Ederna, could you could you unmute yourself, turn on your camera, tell us where you're from?
Yes. Well, I live and practice in Atlanta, Georgia. I am from Uruguay originally. And so my question is, Daniel, I love your work in psychosis and with technology and everything that I read so far. So thank you. And part of my practice is with couples, and I keep having this void of theoretical, I don't know, thinking about how these extreme states when one of the partners in the couple is diagnosed with psychosis or is psychotic, or and working with those couples is so difficult, but at the same time so enriching, and I need help basically. So what I'm asking is if you
Think
have
more
any
about what you notice in these couples when one has been diagnosed with psychosis and the other not.
Right. Well, first of all, is the creation of meaning that you're talking about is that I work from the perspective that I help create in the room this third space, so the three of us can think together about this third space, which is not one, not the other, but it's something that they both have to deal with, have to reckon with, have to think about, have to make meaning of. And so lots of times I find myself, I worked with long-term with couples like this, configured like this, and I find myself that I slip into sometimes into didactic role or more supportive role that I usually would do it with other couples or with individuals, of course, in analysis and all that. So that's what I'm coming from, is that how to, I guess, reconcile these different roles as a therapist in the room with the thinking about these couples. I don't know if I make any sense.
You are making sense. I have a couple like this right now, actually.
Yeah,
Well, there are a few things. Every couple is unique,
of
obviously,
course.
but there is something that I've seen with these kinds of couples over and over again, and I don't know if you see this. First of all, you have to be alert to a folie à deux. You know,
Absolutely. Yes.
there's something going on that's serving both,
Yeah.
rather than just look at the identified patient.
Of
There
course.
there may be the need from both sides for one to be the sick one, the ill one, the needy one, and the other one to be the caretaker or the enabler.
Right.
So sometimes I include psychoeducation in my work when I see it's necessary.
I just want to be forgiven by the gods of psychoanalysis.
Goddesses.
And goddesses.
Today's International Women's Day.
Right.
So one of the things that I tend to instruct the partner is to treat the psychotic
Identify. Yeah.
psychotic partner at their highest level.
Right.
I do that with everyone anyway, with my patients, with my students. I try to lift them up to what their potential is, rather than, there is a pull for regression. Take care of me. I can't do this. You speak for me. You do for me. And
You decide for me. Yeah.
and they're perfectly capable of doing for themselves,
Right.
and you find that they can. And so so I instruct the partner, or you can point out how they may be enabling this dynamic and actually encouraging the continuation of the sick role.
Right.
We used to call this secondary
Gain or benefit.
gains to an illness, and they exist, and you see it very clearly often with couples.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Paulina, you're next. If you could unmute yourself, turn on your camera. If it's not turned on, tell us where you're from. And Stefan, hang in there because you're next.
Thank you. I'm Paulina from Bulgaria, Europe. And my question is, first of all, thank you for your wonderful talk. And my question is, if it is not too naive, but I'll pose this question: how do you address the patient's fears of a second or another psychotic breakdown if the patient is completely lucid and functioning normally at present?
Mhm. Well, there's always, there is a risk. So chapter 10 of the book tells, of a case that I worked with who had 3 psychotic breaks and then a major depression. And after each psychotic break, it would last about 6 months. Most of them would last about 6 months. And then, slowly he would come out of it. And we would spend sometimes up to a year analyzing what happened, how did it happen, what could happen. In other words, preparing. And each one, was somewhat different. And I think that because we did that work, his final was a depressive state. It wasn't a psychotic state, because now he recognized what he had lost and was able to mourn and to grieve what losses he had experienced from the being psychotic during those periods. So just because somebody comes out of the acute psychotic episode doesn't mean you stop working on the psychosis. You can use that time, now that they're lucid, now that they can, engage and explore, then that's the next phase, to not let go of it and pretend, it never happened, because that's what's going to strengthen the person, the understanding of what happened, how they got better too, and what helped to get better, and what, abilities they can have to identify when things are beginning to loosen up again and catch it early on to try to prevent that. On the other hand, you have people like Winnicott and me sometimes, where sometimes there is a need for a regression, and some people want that regression and feel they have to experience a regression. That hence the title of the book came from this patient, when at one point he said, I don't know if I'm having a breakdown or a breakthrough. And they can be both. They can be both. The breakdown can lead to the breakthrough if it's handled well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Stefan Baker, could you unmute yourself, turn your camera on, tell us where you're from?
Hello, thanks. Yeah, I'm contacting you from Warsaw, Poland, but I'm originally from the UK.
Hi.
Hello. Yes, thanks for the paper and the talk, really interesting. One thing I wanted to sort of just draw attention to was that incredible piece of writing by patient Al at the end that you finished the paper with about the description, which I just thought was really extraordinary.
Yes.
And in the context of that, really, in a way, I mean, this might be a very basic question, but what I wanted to hear from you is how you describe or how you think about the sort of the psychotic capacity and mechanism of the mind, what happens. I was very interested by I don't know if you know Donald Campbell and Rob Hale, their book Working in the Dark, about pre-suicidal state of mind.
No.
And they talk about what happens before a patient enters into a pre-suicidal state, or when they enter into a pre-suicidal state. And
Yeah.
one of the things they talk about, which you just mentioned now, is about the inability to mourn.
Yes.
And then a sort of a betrayal by reality that follows, that can be a trigger. And so sort of in that context, in a way, and thinking about what you're identifying as a desire to reconnect with reality. I just wanted to hear sort of how you describe, the triggers of entering into a psychotic state, what that state is, if that's not too general.
Well, it's general, but it needs to be general because there's no one trajectory. You can have people who develop an acute psychosis overnight from smoking marijuana, for example. We were learning the last couple of decades how much marijuana, especially the recent, much more intense marijuana, can cause psychotic episodes overnight in young, and I've seen it in at least a dozen patients, young patients, all male for some reason. Interesting. So there are certain precursors that can, throw somebody a psychedelic marijuana that can suddenly create this psychotic state. There can be a situation that the person just is overwhelmed by. Really, what we're talking about is that the person is overwhelmed by a reality that they cannot deal with. And so they develop an alternate reality via their symptoms as an attempt to survive. So when you see psychosis as an attempt to survive, a fight for one's life, then you don't see it in these kind of simplistic biological terms, but that somebody is really trying their hardest with what they can conjure. And here you see the creativity of psychosis, right? Which is why I enjoy working with it. Hence, I asked a lot of people who are creative. Also, there's always been this fine line of, are really creative people also more inclined to be psychotic or to have some kind of bipolar or whatever mental illness. Some people say yes, some people say no. The other thing is not everybody has an acute psychotic break. Many people develop very slowly. There's a slow retreat from reality and alienation. And our technology today is increasing this, because a lot of people who are odd, who don't fit in as adolescents, they retreat and they try to connect via social media, whatever, and then they never go out. We have more. I wrote about the hikikomori as a Japanese epidemic, but we have that all over now because of the technology. And that can create this increasing, alienation from the real world. And it's been found that the people who are on social media the most, they feel connected, but they are the most lonely. So it's because it's not a real connection. It's a pseudo connection. I'm glad you commented on L and his writing. One of the things I do is I encourage, now he was a writer, so I would ask him to write about certain things, certain experiences that he had, and he found it helpful to express himself. And I found it helpful because I really got a sense of what he was going through and what he was struggling with. But even people who are not artists, I encourage journaling or writing. It's, first of all, it creates a bridge between sessions so that, there's a need for continuity. And so I've found that to be very helpful. And to write out their experiences when they've had a manic episode or a psychotic break, that they write it out, because they forget what happened. And then we go over it. We can go over it. We have one chapter in the book on journaling also, and how important that can be for people who've been traumatized, but also for people who've had a psychotic episode. And, that's another thing that's been found the last few decades, how high of a correlation there is between psychosis and trauma, experiences of trauma, especially early trauma. And, when you have people when I was trained, nobody said, ask about trauma with a psychotic patient. Nobody ever told me that. But if you ask, you'll usually find that there is trauma in one's background. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. We have another question from Mark Blunderfield. Mark, could you unmute yourself? Turn on your camera, tell us where you're from. Or not. There we are.
Hi.
Hi.
I can't see myself, but you can see me.
Yes.
Yes, we see you.
Great. Yeah, my question was, I'm using a program that will create an
Mark, where, where
Oh.
are you?
Sorry, I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia.
Welcome.
I've been using a program for a few months now that will create an audio file and a transcript of the psychotherapy session.
Yeah.
And it also creates statistics, like how much of the time the patient talks about the past versus the future. It'll give the rate of speech of both the therapist and the client, and it'll give a summary. And I notice you're using some software that is going to create a summary of this presentation as well. So I was interested if anyone else had tried out. It's a program called upheal.io, if you don't mind me giving a product endorsement.
No.
Had anybody else tried it? If you haven't, I would encourage you. It actually has created a more positive transference with a few patients, especially one that I saw yesterday. He said his style is nihilistic, and everything that's brought up in the session, he has a profound critique of, and he's extremely intelligent. And in 8 years of working with him, this is the only thing he's ever said was something that he really values, is especially the summary. He doesn't like the transcript, but the summary, the artificial intelligence that it uses, it's so accurate that he said he's shown it to close companions, and they say this is talking about you, and it's done it in a way that's really enhanced the psychotherapy.
So you get, this is fascinating. I know about the summaries for meetings, but you're the first person that I've heard uses it in sessions. So you get permission from the patient to do this, and then you both look at the transcript together or separately?
Well, first separately, because it takes, the session ends and then it takes about 10 minutes for the analysis to occur. So by then the patient has left. And in this case, I would send him the summary. He would spend the next week looking at it. And then the next session, we would start the session by saying, well, what did you think of the last session? The summary.
Yeah.
And then it generates a SOAP note, subjective, objective assessment. And then it even creates a plan for the next session, which is based on the session that you just completed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And some of you know that one of my most recent obsessions is AI. So
Well,
I think it's a wonderful example of how AI can be used in the same way that I was saying when we talked about the word salad and how you can pay attention to this word, that you have AI doing it for you.
Yeah.
He sped up when he was talking here, or this word came up, more than any other word during a session, and you can reflect on these things and then work together on what they mean. So, and probably there's a precision to it that goes beyond the human.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. Put it in the chat for other people to know about.
For sure. Yeah, right now it's it's in the okay.
Put it in the chat. Excuse me, Danielle. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a question that occurred to me, has to do with my own experience. Actually, earlier in my career, I did work extensively with patients who had psychosis in intensive therapies, dynamically oriented therapies. and a couple of things that came to mind. One is that once I started seeing someone 3 times a week and realized that I could not take vacations longer than 2 weeks at a time. That was too, there was nobody I could turn the patient over to if I was going, away for that long. And so I wonder whether you experience those kinds of limitations in terms of the patients that you work with and their capacity to tolerate long absences. And then my second point, which also has to do with things that I write about, have to do with the issue of self-disclosure. So that I actually became more of a self-disclosing therapist, not by coming out to patients, who wanted to know whether or not I was gay, but working with more disturbed patients who I had to tell them what I was actually thinking when they were imagining something else, and I learned to sort of be more direct and say, no, I wasn't thinking that. This is what I was thinking. And then after a number of years of doing that with people who had psychotic symptoms, I said, well, if I can be self-disclosing with more disturbed patients, why can't I be more self-disclosing about other things with patients who aren't psychotic? So I wonder if you had any thoughts about those subjects and those points.
I do. Of course.
Of course you do.
I have thoughts about everything, especially when you ask me. The first question about vacations, it's very important. It's one of those practical questions that one has to consider. I'm a traveler, and so I take about 3 to 4 trips a year. And I tell patients in the beginning that I do and do they think they can tolerate this? Now, some people will say yes, just to work with me, but that doesn't mean that they can tolerate it. So you have to, I always have backups for people who I think, will have trouble, but it is a consideration. Sometimes the absences, if it's during an acute psychotic break, you'll see in chapter 10, those of you who read the book, I stayed in touch with a patient of mine, and this was before virtual telehealth, teletherapy. When somebody is going through a very intense period, I do stay in touch with them almost on a daily basis. So it affects one's vacation, one could say. But as you can tell, I'm pretty dedicated. And I would not take someone on if I know I'm going away very soon, because that the formation of the therapeutic alliance, I think, is so important and can hold people. I think that's one of the considerations you make when you take on a person who has psychotic tendencies, is how do they handle the breaks, not just vacation breaks from one session to the next. Can they handle it? Will you worry about them? So I think you do have to take those things into consideration. It's a practical consideration. As far as self-disclosure, I think I believe very much in the authenticity of the therapist, of the analyst. I think we have to be very real. If you read the Hisoka case, you can see that I disclosed to him more than I have to any other patient in my career. And it wasn't even something that I thought so much about. I just felt that this person had had no clue how to relate, how to be in a relationship, that for me to take some kind of neutral, distant position would not be helpful for him at all. And so I was very real. I answered his questions when he had questions about me, and he came to know me and felt very respectful of my honesty with him. And we could disagree about certain things. So I think the patient really wants to feel that their therapist is being genuine, is being authentic with them. And particularly patients with psychosis, anybody who works a lot with psychosis will say, they're the patients who see through you, or who they pick up your unconscious. So they will see things in you that you don't see. So be prepared that you will be told things about yourself that you may not be aware of, because a lot of the communication is from unconscious to unconscious. I personally like that because I feel I grow from that. But some people feel threatened by that kind of invasion into their unconscious space. But I get exactly what you're saying, Jack, and I think it's not a coincidence that a lot of, at least American psychoanalysts who have worked with psychosis, like Frieda Fromm-Reichmann and Harry Stack Sullivan and Podval and Searles, were interpersonalists, that they believed in the relationship and in being very real and authentic with the patient in the treatment. So I don't think that's a coincidence.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think we only have a couple minutes left. Susan Meindl, you had a couple of comments. You got 2 minutes to just a couple of things you wanted to say to Danielle, if you unmute yourself. Yeah.
I am unmuted. Oops.
I can't tell.
I don't know. Just this whole question of breakdown versus breakthrough. And I wondered whether you've heard of Kazimierz Dabrowski, who does a lot of work in giftedness theory. And he proposed that, he's got a whole theory that's got to do with the necessity to break down in order to reach a higher level of integration. Right. And I think that's also a very interesting way to think about this.
Yeah, no, I don't know that person, but I know that Winnicott believed that. Sometimes Bolas believes that. Christopher
Carl
Bolas.
Jung.
Yeah. So some of us who I work with psychosis. It doesn't mean I believe that every single patient of mine has to have a breakdown to break through, but there are some who really benefit from that regressive pull and getting in touch with something earlier that just didn't evolve and stayed stuck in them. And usually it's a trauma, a loss, and to accompany them through that process, and they come out stronger. Yeah.
And to your idea of the need for connection, I think there are some people that need to break down in order to sort of come to a full stop. The way that they have been going, the way they've been relating, the expectations that people have had on them are just not tenable. And a psychotic break removes everybody's expectations for them and allows them the possibility of a fresh start. If they don't go into a hospital where they say, let us just return you to your previous high level of functioning, which was what was killing them. So, I mean,
so I want to say something about the psychotic break, the idea, the notion of a break, because I think that there's too much thinking that it's as if there's a before and after. And a lot of people, including the patient, including the family members, will say, I'm not myself anymore, or the parents will say, I want Eddie, to come back to who he was. There's all this idea of this person is like a completely different person. And we don't see it that way. We don't see the break as this rupture between a before state and an after state. Instead, and because what happens in that break is psychotic symptoms. And the psychotic symptoms, rather than being a manifestation of a break, I see it as a bridge between what the person was dealing with before and after. They're a bridge that we can, we are invited in to understand the connections between who the person was, what they were going through, what was difficult or impossible for them, and how to get them, to understand it and come out the other end, the breakthrough. So I think the break idea is very much in line with the medical model of, that's a break, let's medicate them, get them back to where they were. But where they were was not great, which is why they had the break in the first place. So I think seeing it as a bridge is more useful therapeutically.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Danielle. Thank you for this. You were great. Hello, Elena, could you unmute yourself? So I'm going to
Elena.
there we go. Okay, thank you. So thank you for this. Thank you to the audience for your participation. I hope people found it as helpful as I did. Perhaps I'd like to just announce our next meeting in April of the Journal Club will feature Dr. Anthony Bass. I think we have a slide. There we go. Dr. Bass will be talking about the experience of working during the COVID epidemic with and without masks. It's a very interesting paper. You can download the paper at the IPA website. There'll be a link to help you download the paper. And perhaps we can all give Dr. Knafo a round of applause for her performance today. Thank you.
Thank you all.